All right. Hello, everyone, or anyone. Doesn't look like anybody's here yet. That's okay. We will just get started. So before the stream, I was setting up some of the tedious stuff, which I think will be a good way to talk about what we're going to work on today, or what I'm going to work on today. So let me know you can hear me and see me okay in the chat. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and cut a branch. So let's do git checkout -b. Request access. And what I've done is gone ahead and create some fixtures, and I think walking through these fixtures are going to demonstrate what bit of automation I'm going to build today. If you follow me on Twitter, you probably saw that I did a poll yesterday, just try to understand how people use request access. I've noticed that in my application, Laravel Shift here, I use it a lot of different ways. I use Git, I use input. I never really use the direct or dynamic property access, but I definitely use validated and all this other stuff. So let's look at these fixtures to kind of see what this is going to look like in code. So let's just imagine you have this controller, again, pretty naive controller here, and what I'm going to do is basically just request, get the request data in all sorts of different ways. So in this case, here's an example of not only using the request helper, but also accessing this first name, form field or request data in what I'm calling a dynamic property access. This property doesn't really exist on the request object, but because of PHP's magic methods, Laravel is kind of helping us out and seeing if one of those exists. I'll go ahead and gripe about this a little bit. I know this may be an older convention or convenient or whatever. I think it's really bad to use this. It's not consistent is the first part. So like if you had something like form-name, like what is this going to be on the other side? Is it underscore? Is it Studley case? Like what does Laravel do, right? And then what happens when you try to access a property that is physical or not a dynamic property? It's an explicit property on that class, right? So maybe there's IP address or something like that. But the point being is that what differentiates between the form fields clobbering data that's really there and vice versa, because of those reasons, I am not a big fan, of using direct access, but it is a use case we want to cover. So moving on, there's Git, you can access form data, there's input, there's all sorts of new cool ones like date and string, I think there's integer maybe, and then validated, which I think is kind of the modern, more preferred, or even safe for that matter. And there's actually one that I forgot. Let's actually bring this one in here. There's also, what else could go with like a user? We got form, we got figure. We could do like password probably, obviously. So let's just say something like, let's be good kids here and write some like kind of real code. And we'll say hash make with, I think you can ask the request helper for this directly as well. So let's just kind of borrow that one. I think you can do the same thing there. So, okay, so this is an example. I have a lot of these examples in the code here, so let's just kind of take a peek at these. So what I want to do is build some automation that makes this consistent, and as we can already kind of see, compared to this other one, we can bring these up kind of side by side. We can see here that once I kind of bring over this password bit, the point is that it takes these additional pieces and pulls those across. So if we have request first and get, or sorry, direct access and get and all these other things, it's going to make this input. So if we chose to use input as our kind of consistent one, then that's what it's going to end up doing. So, hey Ben, hey Gurjan. Oh, Gurjan? Gurjan? Oh, we did this once. I'm sorry. Adrian, what's up? Only watching today. You didn't even make it 5 minutes before you started saying stuff. Oh, there you are. Okay. Let's see here. Hash input. Let's bring in these other ones. So this is going to be request input is what we would come across there. In this case, this is kind of an interesting one. We would actually use request in this scenario. So request input password, and let's bring the same thing in up here. We brought that one across. This is request. So this is going to remain requests input password. And then we need to do the same thing for this other one. So basically I'm just setting up these fixtures because it's going to make life a lot easier here in a minute when I actually start writing the test cases for these. So let's just bring this across and any of these inputs. So in this case, let's say we configured the automation to do validated. So now there are more, there's safe, there's whatever else, there's blah, blah, blah. And I've got some other things like middleware, just some various pieces of the Laravel framework, components of the Laravel framework that we would potentially automate. But I think the controller really kind of drives it home. And again, there might be more, feel free to let me know in the chat. But this kind of gives us a start of those types of things. So, hey, what's going on, JT? Hey, Sarab, what's up? The other cool one I like is collect. Yeah, so this won't change collections. This is strictly about single access. So that's kind of a nuance of this automation. So it's only going to be when you're like accessing a single form field. So if you're trying to like collect other things, or you're doing only, or all these other things, that's not really, at least for this first iteration of this automation, that's not really what I'm focused on. I'm focusing on kind of that single field access. So yes, there are dozens of methods you could use to gather request data. I'm talking about the very specific single field bit of data. So now that we have this, let's try to start building some automation for it. And I'll somewhat TDD this out today, I think. I'm feeling a bit saucy. So let's close the fixtures, jump into tasks. This is going to be a workbench task. And all the Laravel ones are kind of top level here. So again, I'm going to copy and paste one of these into, let's just call this request data test, I think is what we're calling this. Request access is what I called it. That's okay, we can change it here in a minute. So let's take this and we'll say request access. Or request data. Gosh, I already messed it up, look at that. It's like request data access is really what it is. All right, there we go. Okay, so again, I'm going to sort of practice TDD here. So I'm not necessarily going to wait till we see the failing test and all that stuff because I don't want to mess with Docker, or at least mess with it as little as possible. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and start generating things where I know we're going to be missing. So in this case, PHP Storm's kind of already telling me in a failure type capacity that, hey, look, this request data class doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and create it. It's going to be under Shift Task Workbench, request data. Now all these tasks extend a base test class. So think of them kind of like models. And what they have is a single method called perform. And this is where I want to do all the automation. So the automation will go here. And the way Shift works is it kind of follows like a pipe and filter pattern, or a collection pipeline, if you will. But if we go look at something like the Vite converter, we'll see that it gets all the tasks. It too has kind of this base class way that it works. And it basically just has, again, a pipeline or a collection of these tasks that need to be run. So all these different things run for the Vite converter. It checks your Laravel dependency, it checks your NPM dependency, it updates the scripts, your configuration, it removes Webpack, blah, 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 blah. So this is what a low-level task looks like, and this can be part of a shift, or it can be an individual task run in the workbench. So this is where everything's going to go, and this is just kind of a free-floating workbench task. So again, it's not part of any specific, Vite converter, Laravel fixer, or Laravel 9 shift. It's not part of any specific shift at the moment. It's just kind of this free-floating task, and that's really what the workbench is. It's just all these tasks, premium free, a lot of free tasks, mostly free, but again, things for Laravel 9 or whatever. So that's what we're doing here. We're building a workbench task. So that solves that error. And now what we're going to do is kind of check this out and see if there's see if we can drive this out with some tests. So a while back I wrote this interacts with project, and this really allows me to test Shift in a very integration kind of way. So what we do is we basically kind of fake a project. This allows us to fake a Laravel project without having to do something like installing the framework or using test bench or anything like that. It's kind of our own version of that. And so what I like to do is always just have a test where it's like, hey, it does nothing when no instances are found. So we could do something here like HTTP controllers and no op. And this would basically just do nothing. We would kind of assert, we're going to make the request data. In this case, it's going to take some options, so we don't have any passed in just yet. And then we're going to actually perform that task as we saw in here, the automation, perform the automation. And then in this case, assert nothing was changed. So let's copy these the same, and let's just kind of follow conventions here. So we'll say no op controller. And again, this just has basic PHP code in it. There's no fixture for this. It's just a raw PHP class. So it'll get parsed, but it won't find anything. And so all we're doing is just making sure like, hey, you didn't find anything, and it's all good. Okay. And then here we can say, kind of driving it out a little bit better, this next test case, let's actually push on and kind of make it do some stuff here. So we'll say something like, it converts, or let's see here, it converts instances to the input method. Okay, so what we would do here is let's go back and look at our fixtures. Let's look at our fixtures here. This might be a little easier. So let's do lslt. Okay, so we have a controller, and then we have all these inputs afterwards. So let's do this. So let's do HTTP controllers user controller. Let's get some more screen real estate here. .php, and that's going to be test fixtures workbench. We call this request access, even though that should be request data, so we're going to change that. And let's do controller. So this is going to wire up inside of a user controller that particular fixture. So let's do this for our other things too. So we'll also have like app models, user, and again, I'm just demonstrating all the different places in the application where these request instances are found. We're still going to keep this no op thing, but we're going to make this other stuff. So we have middleware is another one, and I think this is just like example middleware or something like that. Doesn't really matter. Example middleware. I think I called it like do stuff. Something simple. Anyway, middleware and model. Wow, can't type. Okay, and then we'll keep this no op as well. We could even try to fake it out by doing something like request, whatever. Okay, so we have the controller wired up, we have the user, we have the do stuff. We're going to call this, and we're going to say here method. We would want to say method is input. And the fact that this is grayed out is letting me know that we're already missing some code. But let's finish this test case. So we're going to assert that file changes on test fixtures workbench and then request data. So again, we're just wiring stuff up here. Request data, and we would say controller input after, and we're going to do this for a lot of stuff. So let's have middleware input after and user input after. And now we need to clean up this side of it. So let's middleware.php. Or wait, no, I called that something else. So this one's going to be controllers. We got to match the names up here. So the user controller is going to be controllers, user controller.php. So let's get rid of that. And then this one's going to be do stuff middleware. So that's that. And then finally, this one, more simply, is models user. Okay, So what this does is assert that this file now, after we've performed the automation, should look like this after fixture, like we saw, where everything's converted to using that input method. So if we call request data with this method explicitly of what we want to use, then it should end up converting anything that it can or anything reliably to use input. Now there's going to be a bit of nuance to that, and we'll kind of prove that out with some of these additional test cases. But for now, let me get rid of the rest of these, and I am going to fire up Docker, and we'll kind of see, we'll see this fail at least. So we'll give that just a second. And then we'll start building a lot of automation. There is some stuff that exists already with the request object. So I might have some stuff we can use. We'll see. While I'm thinking about it though, let's do a move on that to request data. That should fix our test fixtures. All right, so I think we have a shift runner, vendor bin PHP unit. I did, if you watched the streams before, I did uninstall and reinstall Docker, and it seems to be better. So, okay, great. Okay, so we have two failures. Oh, sorry. So the first test passed, of course, because we're doing nothing. So if we do nothing, we get nothing. So that test is kind of automatically going to pass. But I like to write it nonetheless, just for sanity, as we add more things that, you know, when it doesn't find anything, it's not updating files. So as we add more code, there's the potential that that could start to fail. So even though it's auto-passing right now, I think it'll be better later. So here we go. With our test fixtures here, we get a nice little PHP unit output where it's comparing these two strings, and it's saying, hey, expected input, but the actual was still that first name and get. So those two lines should have gotten converted based on the data that I passed in. Same thing down here. We see where, you know, password, and in this other update method, same thing. It did not pull those across the way in which our test case would have expected it to. So that's a good failure. So with that, let's start writing this code. So the first thing I need to do is make this constructor. And this constructor takes an array of options. And these options are basically going to be, this method is options method or null. I'm just thinking out loud here. You wouldn't really want to run this with null. Like you have to set something here. Let me look at, should probably write a test case for this, but let me look at some of these other bits here. Let's find constructors inside of this. Oh, do I have this on? What's here? Construct. There we go. All right, I'm just trying to see where I use options. Here we go. If it's empty, unexpected value. Yeah, okay. I think we probably want to do a little checking here to make sure that these options get passed in the way in which we would expect. So if method is empty in options, then unexpected value method was empty. Let's bring this in, and we'll backfill a test case for this real quick. But basically, we need to store and construct the method that comes across. So in this case, you know, we might want to say something like method equals input, and we should probably, let's test this, but we should probably make sure that it is kind of what we expect. We'll get to that in a second. So we'll not fake this project here because it doesn't really matter, and we'll say it throws an exception when method not set. All right, so we'll call it with nothing. We'll call for perform, and in this case, we'll just use a good old PHP unit expectation. So we'll say unmet. Is it an unmet ship required or unexpected value exception? All right. I don't know why that has multiple class declarations, but, and then we'll say the message should be method not set, or was empty. What do we say? Method was empty. I like method not set better. All right, let's run this test again. We got a failure. Oh wait, too far. Failed asserting that type unexpected value exception. Oh, I imported the wrong thing. Unexpected value exception. What the hell is PHP stand doing? All right, let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so we're back to the single failure now. So that's probably what we want. I do think maybe validate the types of, or let's see here, method values passed in. I don't know, maybe. I don't know if I want to do that or not, because it kind of gets done on the shift side when you run a workbench, but yeah, I guess you could hack it somehow. I don't know, we'll see. Okay, so what I want to do now is, what I normally do in shift is I'll say something like paths equals shift, and then it's something like find PHP files matching, and I would say something in here like, you know, request, : or request, arrow. But the problem now is, like, you could really name this other variable anything you want. You could really name that other variable anything you want. So that's not really like 100%, right? Because I mean, you could call this like rec. What would work, I think, and again, this all gets proven out with the test cases, is if you looked for illuminate HTTP request, I think you'd be guaranteed that if this existed in there, it'd probably be a file that I'd want to look at. Now again, it might not actually use the invocation of the method, but at least it would kind of demonstrate that they've type hinted something, which is pretty common within a controller or whatever, that you would have to type in something that way. Again, it's still not 100%, because what if you use a form request object instead of that? You're not going to bring that in. Ugh. Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking through that here real quick. I think we'll move forward with this, but I don't think it's 100%. So we'll basically say if empty paths, then return, and that's kind of my do nothing bit here. And then what I always do is for each pass as path, and then here's kind of where the magic starts to happen. All right, I'm hearing some stuff in the chat. Let's check you out. Don't forget to clean up your imports. Don't forget to clean up your imports. Okay. What about custom request? Yeah, exactly. Haven't finished my espresso yet, so yes, there are definite. This really isn't going to catch everything. Let's think about this for a second. I'm just trying to avoid like parsing every PHP file in the project. That's going to be really slow. You know, it's going to get not exponential, but it's kind of like, that's kind of like a O of N operation, so to speak, in like big O notation. And normally I try to kind of limit that to only instances that are found, because this find files matching is like basically a grep. and so it's super fast, and it would immediately kind of filter and limit the things I would even want to look at. But you're right, if there's a custom form request, it's not really going to work out. I could miss things. And given that we don't know the object that they're, what they're calling the request object, those are tough ones. Those are pretty tough. You'd have to analyze each class in a way to see, if the type hinted thing, and again, it might not even be type hinted. Yeah. I think I'm going to say that if you don't follow Laravel's convention of at least type hinting like you do in controller, I don't think I'm going to be able to. That's something that's going to have to kind of be tweaked. And again, Shift is all about kind of this beta and getting it in the hands of the users and learning more, right? I'm not going to be able to sit here and think of every way every Laravel developer writes their code. And that's okay. I've accepted that a long time ago. And I think that's what allows me to make Shift as great as it is, because I think that, a lot of people might get stuck with that ambiguity, stuck with that missing 10 or 20% of applications that are maybe using form requests in that way, or maybe not type hinting, right? And they try to build that and they'd never launch anything. So I think that's what allows me to kind of push with Shift, is that, and that I'm willing to kind of learn what it's missing. So all that is to say that I think we know that, it's kind of like, what about form requests? Is kind of the big area where we are now. Like what about non, let's see here, parameters that are not type hinted as request, right? Like, I don't think I'm going to be able to solve that one. There's no amount of static analysis that's really going to allow me to find that, at least not a single pass. You'd have to do like these IDEs you do. You'd have to like graph an entire thing to see, okay, this thing called that, and when that thing called it was a request object at that point, so we know what it is. Like that's IDE power on your local machine with like backed by like Neo4j. Like that's great. I'm not gonna build all that. So I don't think I'm going to worry too much about that one. I do think we need to worry about form requests. Probably not today, because I don't want to get too far off track. Adrian, you could search for classes that extend for it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there's ways around this. I think we could say, like, if you have form request objects, I would kind of automatically go in, not only and analyze those, but maybe add those to kind of like this whitelisted bit of a search. But even with that, I think you'd still end up doing like an entire project search, because this find files matching has its own limits, right? Like I wouldn't be able to do this. I mean, what if you had like 200 form requests, right? Like it's gonna be massive. So the more I think about this, the more I think that I'm probably just gonna have to loop over all of the PHP files and then kind of fetch their contents and kind of pre-filter them in a way, like if they're not one of these things. But again, for the purposes of this test, to get this test passing, at the most I would need to do this. I probably don't even need to do this illuminate part. I think these two would get me enough, because it's a mixed bag, right? So with that said, I think let's kind of go with that and prove this at first. So to that point, let's drop this just to kind of prove that these are enough. And I'm also going to need to escape that. Okay, so here's my pattern. If you're using a request facade or the request helper in some capacity, and that really can't even be that capacity, it kind of have to be this capacity, then I would definitely want to take a look at it. Again, these don't have to be perfect, but they need to they actually need to intentionally be loose so they catch as much as possible. Now again, we're still missing form requests, so got a little note there. Okay, so yeah, let's kind of prove that this doesn't work. I think we talked about that enough. So let's do contents equals shift get file contents on path. So that's going to give me all the contents, and then what I'm going to want to do now is I'm going to want to parse this class, and I don't think I'll have enough time to kind of get all the way through this, but I think there's some parsers that exist. So maybe we can, again, get the idea of how this works. So ultimately, I would want to do shift put file contents of contents, whoops, path, and then contents. So we would put that Humpty Dumpty back together again. So here, we basically, let's just get a little pseudocode. Let's parse the file for request access, convert instances to use method, this method. All right, there we go. So pretty straightforward, 2 lines, but this is where we get a little bit dense. So let's go look at my parsers. I've got a handful of parsers, and I do think I have a request access parser already that's being used elsewhere. So here in parsers, I got a crap load of finders, and let's just kind of see if I've got a finder that might help. Request validation finder. So what these finders are, basically, they come from Nikic's parser, and if you've watched some of the previous streams, you've seen that Nikic's parser is really the parser out there for PHP. So it kind of gives you an abstract syntax tree, and it's really what everything uses. PHP stan, rector, everything uses this. So does shift, and I like using it directly because it kind of gives me the most power to kind of figure things out. I don't have to learn like an additional library for PHP stan or rector. Again, great tools, but I can use this directly myself, and again, kind of shift is its own similar tool like those that does its own analysis. So it's just better for me to be closer to the metal here. So let's kind of take a peek at what this does, because I'll probably copy this and kind of use the same thing. So this looks in here to see, this basically looks to see if it's calling a validate method on is a method call. So we probably would have more, but we have is request facade, is request validator. Yeah, it kind of just, this is on the right track, but this actually isn't everything I want. I wonder if there's anything else. Validate method finder. This one might be a bit closer. Is request validation. Variable func call request. This actually might be a little closer to what I want. Let's start with this one. So let's copy this, paste this. We'll call this request data finder. It's kind of like a request access finder, but that's okay. We can mess with it later. So request data finder. Whoops. All right, let's just kind of work through this together. I'm hearing some chat. Let's see here. Whoops. Sorry. What about request? Yeah. Yeah, again, I think we mentioned before, but we'll use it for now, but some people might call it rec or R or whatever. Again, I can't think of all the different ways people might rename that variable. I appreciate that request is the convention, and we can try to leverage that as much as possible. But again, it's not going to get us 100%. So we'll want to think of something else. So okay, so if it's not a method call or it's not a static call, then we immediately want to return. So the way this works is, think of the search method as handle. It's basically going to tell you true or false if this is a snippet of code that I want to care about. So what I need to do here is think of all those different controller instances that we want. So This is kind of like a property call, right? This is like a facade, a static call here. So these are kind of the different ways in which I would want to mess with this. So if it's not a method call, meaning one of these, and it's not an instance of static call. Now this is kind of a little bit different. So we're gonna want to tweak this to kind of get that, because this is probably a property fetch, I think is what that's called. So let's say if it's not node, not instance of property, I think it's property fetch, there we go. And let's break these down. That's starting to get a little rowdy. Okay, so if it's not a property fetch, if it's not a method call, and it's not a static call, then return false. We don't want to mess with it, right? So if we think about this, that's going to handle this one. There's a property fetch, here's a method call, and then here's a static call on a method that's here. So if it's not one of those, then we know that we just wouldn't care about it, right? Adrian, app request. Yeah, there's so many different ways to do this. It's gross. Yeah, that might be a different shift to take app request and turn it into the request helper or something along those lines. Okay, next we would say that if this is not an identifier, then return false. That's probably not going to work for us on node name there. Let's see what prop fetch has. This has var. Oh, identifier's name. Okay. And then what is, oh, name. Okay, cool. So if you're doing something, if you were doing, name is actually the name of the thing that you're either fetching or calling. So what the example here is, like if you're doing something like request method where this part of it is dynamic, then I'm just gonna bail, because again, I don't know what that is, right? So if it's not one of those, we return false. If it's not one of those, we return false. And now here's where we would want to do our customizations. So just to kind of demonstrate, let me just do a print r here, or a var dump, I think is going to be better, of node. And we'll just kind of see the craziness that pops out here. Or well, sorry, we need to wire this up so we actually get this far. So let's take a look at where we use this, because there's some code to set up this validation. Whoops, there's some code it takes to kind of set this up. So let me bring this to life. We got this validate parser. So let's bring it over here. So we know once we find some stuff, we would set up a parser, and we would say new Nikic parser, and in this case it would be request data finder, and we're not going to pass anything else. And here we would just say parser, or well, this is occurrences, I think I call this. Can't spell today. Let's fix that. That was gross. How do you typo? Occurrences. There we go. And now we would say parser, parse the code. And let's print r, or well, we don't need to do any of the occurrences yet. We can just dump this out. So we should get something pretty rowdy here. So if we take a look at this, we get a bunch of pieces out. There's going to be a lot. Let's just try to go to one of these top references so we can see. Might have to go all the way up. There we go. It's finding so many of these, it's pretty rowdy. Okay, so here's a static call, and if we take a look at the static call, it kind of tells us what line it is and the token and the position and everything of it, and then it says the class, the name of the class. In this case, the fully qualified name is going to be app models user, so it kind of lets us know this is a static call. Now in this case, what it's finding is the parts of this, it's finding that user create. Technically, that is a static call, right? It's a static method call that's being used there. And this isn't a dynamic name, it's create. So this is one of them that's coming across. So we can see that we're finding the pieces of the code. We've refined it a bit, but we need to refine it farther. Now we need to kind of make sure that some pieces of this are the things we actually care about. Otherwise, we're going to get all sorts of code. So let's try to filter this down, and then I'll probably stop the stream there for today. Okay, so now we need to basically ensure that the call or caller or is request, basically. is a request. All right. And what we can do here, this is all sorts of different things. So this means facade. So this can be like request : It can be the request helper, effectively. What else can it be? I mean, I guess it can be, in this case, we'll just start with this one. It can be a variable, but the name of that has to also be request. So what we want to do here is basically say if this dot is request facade, if it's not a request facade, and it's not, let's just start breaking these down, and it's not is request helper, and not is request object, then we would basically return false. Otherwise, true, everything's good. So let's start building these methods, because I think I have a few of them already. So let's add a helper here. And I think is request validation. So if it's not an instance of a method call, return false. Otherwise, is validator facade. So let's borrow this one, because I think it's going to get us pretty close. So we could say here that this is going to be a node, and if node's not a static call, then we automatically know it's not the request facade. And then a static call has a class. Again, if we know it's not a name, meaning it's dynamic, then we would also return false. Otherwise, we're going to get the very end of the parts. We don't care about the method that it calls, but str2 lower on parts needs to be request, effectively. Now, there might be check fqn, fully qualified class name. I don't know if we can get the fully qualified class name out of that. We might try that later, but we know that if it's a static call and the final piece of that call is request, then I would feel pretty good that that's going to be a request facade. Oh, we need to pass in node on all these. Let's fix that. Node. There we go. All right, so is request facade, you got a node. All right, so let's make the next one of these. The next one of these is the helper. So is request helper. It's not a method call, it's just a node. And similar to this, we would probably, it's actually going to be really, really similar. It's almost the same thing even. So in this case, request helper, this is going to have to be a method call, but the method call has a var, and that var is going to need to be a func call, I think. Yeah, this is kind of interesting. And then you'd have to say func call. This is deep. So then var name, which is func call, is not a name. And then finally, this would be var. I'll explain this here in just a second. Let me kind of crank this out. Parts. Kind of do the same thing here. All right, sweet. So what we're doing here is we're saying it's a method call. Could be a method call, or it could be a prop fetch. Yeah. And node. This is the hard part of shift. This is as hard as it gets though. So property fetch. Okay, so think of these as requests, first name. And again, all this is in our test cases, so I'm kind of cooking pretty quickly here. I'm coding pretty quickly here. Or you could have something like input first name. And we could even go so far as to have request first name, and I think we have that as password in our fixture. So again, all these are kind of covered. So again, I'm typing this up as I'm thinking of these. So this would be our prop fetch version, and then this would be our method call version, and then this one we're actually missing. So this one's kind of to do. Okay, so just kind of breaking this down for a second. If it's not a method call here, and it's not a prop fetch here, if it's not one of those two versions, then it's not using the request helper. That's just not how the request helper can be used. And then the var side of this side of the call has to be a function call, meaning this, right? That's a function, it's a helper function in Laravel, so it has to be a function call. If it's not, return false. And then same thing, this cannot be dynamic in some way. So long as that's a node name, meaning it's just a simple string, then that's good. And we get the last part of it, meaning if someone did somehow globally reference that, we would just want to make sure to get the end of it. And then finally, that is request, right? So it has to be request, and that's just how Laravel is, right? That's a Laravel helper global function. So we do need to figure out that one, but this handles those two, or at least it should anyway. All right, let's get this last one, and then I'm going to stop the stream. Okay, so let's borrow these, because it's, again, pretty darn close. So this has to be a method call or a property fetch, so same thing. It's not a function call in this case. What the variable expression would be here is indeed an expression. So this would have to be an expression of a variable. I forget what that's called, but I think it's like variable, yeah. So the var side of this has to be a variable, and the variable would have to be a string. So variable string name, yeah. So let's just say, I think I would have to say like is string. So if it's not a string, then return, and then finally the string of this name, lowercase, again, just in case they called it something else, is request, right? All right, I think that's everything. Let's see what these end up looking like. Let's make sure I got them all, didn't delete anything wrong. Okay, so I think everything that we need is there. Now let's see if I got far enough. So instead of dumping out all the crazy Nikic parser stuff, let's dump out these. I'm gonna run this again. Is request object argument must be of type method call, method static given. Okay, I don't remember making it type hinted that way, but let's go find it. So let's get in here. Request helper. I think my auto generation, I don't know why it made it a method call. It's strange. All right, let's see what it got. Oh, good. Okay, so it found some stuff. All right, so let's see if this matches up to what we would expect, right? Okay, so we've got some stuff that dumped out here. Let's kind of go look at our controller, and let's see if our lines make sense here. So it's saying it found something on line 13, boom, 14, boom. Let's see, 15, 16, 17. So 15, 16, 17. Now look, it did not find that one, and this is a direct access as a function call, calling the helper with a parameter. So we knew that we were missing that case, so that makes sense so that it did not find line 18. It jumps now down to line 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and it's missing 30, again, because it's a direct function call. Let's see if we can pick up that function call, and that's where I'm going to stop the stream, because honestly, the rest of this stuff is just doing basically some string replacement to figure out exactly where that is. We know where this thing has some boundary cases, but now that we've parsed it in a syntax tree and we have like all the positions of the characters and everything, the rest of it is just some fancy string replacement or regular expressions. The parser is really where all the power is, right? It's kind of thinking through all these different cases. So let's get that function call real fast, and we'll go from there. So we also need to say it can be a property fetch or it can be a func call. And func call would have to be a name. So node name. Node name's identifier. Func call node name is just node name. So what we would do here is say, we kind of have to break this up. So if it's not an instance of identifier, I'm trying to think here. We would have to get a little fancy here. We'd have to say something like, if node is an instance of func call and node or not is string node name, right? Because a func call, oh no, sorry, func call is node name. So node name, I don't know why this one's different. I wish it was an identifier so we could just keep the code we have, but node name, there we go. And then I'm trying to think here, is this an and or an or? Why does it not like me? There we go. Okay, so let's think about this. If it's a function call and it's not an instance of node name, or node name is not an instance of identifier. Yeah, I think this is an or. Because this would be false if you're not a function call, in which case we'd want to check that. So I think that's an or. Let's find out. Whoa, I don't want to upgrade right now. All right, let's run this one more time, and hopefully we see 18 and 30, I think, if we look. Nope, still nothing yet. I think we're getting past that. I think we need to update this isRequestHelper. Yeah, we need to update this to allow for a function call. So we kind of have like a special path here. So we could say something like, if node is an instance of func call, then we basically would return node name. And I think if we looked, this was just like a string parts. Okay. It's kind of gross, but whatever. Yeah, okay, so node is an instance of a function call. Then we'd have to say name parts, kind of the same thing here. Name parts would have to be, this is going to get nasty, but let's just finish it up, is equal to request. And technically speaking, you would have to be passing it something. You'd have to pass it something. So we'd have to say node args count is greater than 0. You got to be passing it something. All right, let's try this. Still 29. All right, let's see. Print, oh, I don't think it's var, is it? It's name. I copied that code. Node name parts, what's wrong with you? Oh, parts is a string. Oh, missing some code there. All right, let's try this one more time. Still no 29. Okay, so let's go dump that out. Var dump node. Let's just see if we're getting in here. So we're not even getting in there. Why would we not be getting in there with the func call? If it's not, maybe we're not getting low enough because of this. Maybe this is filtering us out when I don't want it to. If it's an instance of func call and the name of the function is not an instance of name, then we would return false. Let's try to do a quick var dump of filtering, and we can just say node get start line. And checking. What's wrong with this? Value parameter missing. Oh, I think it's just catching up. All right, let's see where we get here. So it's not even getting to line 19. It is getting to 30 here. Oh, maybe my line numbers are off. Oh, okay, line 18 is what we care about. So it is getting to line 18, it's checking line 18, and it's getting to filtering 30, and then checking 30, and it's filtering 30 again. That's strange. Oh, it's a double call because of hash make. That's what's going on there. Okay, cool. So we are getting as far as we kind of expect here. So it's not that, it's somewhere in request helper that I think is probably returning a false. So let's get down to request helper and let's just move our checking there and see where we get. So it is checking 18 and it's checking 30. All right, but it's not getting in this for func call. Why doesn't it think that's a func call? Oh, I think filtering 30, it comes out, it's checking 30, it's filtering 30, and it doesn't get down to checking. Okay, this is kind of tricky. Nick, yeah, I'll have to finish this one later. Here's what's going on. This is actually a nested call within hash make, which is a static call. Okay, now it doesn't qualify for one that we care about, but because this is inside of another call on the same line, there's a little bit of nuance here in the parser. It actually works like depth first, so that's why we're seeing it's filtering 30 and then it's checking 30 and then it's filtering 30 again. So it's getting in here, it's checking this, it's filtering it, meaning it did pass our initial test, but then it's also checking this line, and it doesn't get past that check, right? Because that func call is not one that we would expect, right? I think the nested aspect of this requires me to add a little bit of a check here, and I think that's why, even though we're getting to a place where we're checking it, this particular node is not what we expect because of that nesting. So I'm gonna have to debug that a bit, or look at a reference where I've done something like that before, where the nesting allows it to pass. It's a little tricky, yeah, because the syntax tree is kind of, you know, it's a tree, so you have all these branches and leaf nodes and everything else. So you kind of have to traverse it the right way, and while you're traversing it, I think there's something where I gotta like say, oh, this one's already passed, so even though I didn't let the hash make pass, you know, this piece of that line passes. So it's a little bit interesting. I think we're starting to get a bit deep there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off. We're right at an hour. Perfecto. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining live. Again, when this is available, you'll be able to see this out here. It will probably be a premium task for Laravel. So you'll see this in here, similar to request injection. There'll be request, request data, request access, whatever I land on for the final name, and it will allow you to kind of make this consistent within your application. Whether you want to use input, validated, safe, whatever it is, that's going to be configurable. Those are all the pieces. So again, once this parser's done, it's just a matter, well, not just, but it's a matter of replacing the instances in code to use the method which you opted for in your workbench build. So follow me on Twitter to see when that's released. Hopefully maybe a beta later this week, and then we'll go back and figure out, maybe even next week, I'll add some of the additions to it to kind of see some of those app request things, some of the form request stuff, make it a little more robust to find more instances that are maybe called in a dynamic way, but are also common to use. So if you have any ideas, again, hit me up on Twitter. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, hopefully the beta will be out maybe Thursday. So thanks everybody for joining live, and I will see you all next time.